Remembrance and reconciliation, 100 years on. Tonight, for the first time, the Queen welcomed the German President to a service of thanksgiving in Westminster Abbey. Earlier, there was a 2-minute silence for the fallen. Then came the wreaths, Prince Charles laying the first on behalf of the Queen. President Macron welcomed world leaders to Paris and warned them against nationalism and ambitions of domination. It has been a day of memories around the world, in great public spaces and on village greens. Also on the programme, Theresa May's hopes for a Brexit deal before Christmas are fading fast. California's deadly fires whipped up by fresh winds, the death toll rises. And City give United the blues in the Manchester derby.
This is ITV News with Alistair Stewart.
Good evening. Tradition was honoured today in memory of the millions who died in 2 world wars and other conflicts since. There was the 2-minute silence, the last post, and a procession of wreath-laying by royalty and political leaders alike. But in an act of reconciliation, the President of Germany was also invited to lay a wreath at the cenotaph and to attend a service of thanksgiving in Westminster Abbey tonight. Emma Murphy has our first report.
100 years after the guns fell silent, a moment to remember a war which was supposed to end all others. None of those who fought in those battles are still alive, but those who fought subsequent ones are. They have grown old and age has wearied, but in silence they remembered. The wreaths to honour those who served and fell were this year laid by Prince Charles on behalf of the Queen. And for the first time by the German President, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, his wreath in the colours of the German flag, a moment to reflect on how old enemies can become allies. But this was not a day just for dignitaries. For the first time, a People's March of Thanksgiving saw 10,000 join together to share proud family memories. Alison McClure's grandfather served the whole of the war.
He didn't want to remember it. He said he went, he did what he was asked to do, and thankfully he came back. And then he just wanted to forget it and move on and get on with the rest of his life.
Aged 10, Arabella came having just started to learn about the war.
Because of all the people who saved our lives just for our freedom.
Tonight, that sacrifice was acknowledged once more in Westminster Abbey, as wreaths were laid on behalf of the Queen and the German President upon the tomb of the unknown warrior.
Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends.
The Prince of Wales read from the Bible as this Armistice centenary drew to a close. From the morning to the going down of the sun, those lost were and will be remembered. Emma Murphy, ITV News.
Away from those services in central London, millions also fell silent at gatherings around the country. At events, large and small, the men and women who left their towns and villages never to return were remembered by those who live there now in peace. And on the beaches, the faces of the fallen and the poets who honoured their sacrifice were sculpted in the sand, only to be washed away by the waters they crossed on their way to war. Damon Green reports on the nation remembering 100 years on.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old.
It is traditionally a day when petty differences are set aside, when thousands of people across the country take a few moments to stand together. At the National Arboretum in Staffordshire, 10,000 people were present to remember those from every part of Britain, from every walk of life, who laid down their lives. In Edinburgh, the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon was among those paying tribute to the Scots who served and are still serving. Some of those who served had no home and left no trace. This ceremony on a waterway in Cheshire was to commemorate the 10,000 boatmen who served in the Great War, many of whom died and had no village to carve their name on a memorial. These floating poppy petals scattered on the water were for them. The ceremonies being conducted in every corner of this country are a reminder that after 100 years the world may be a very different place, but for the people of Britain the importance of remembering has never ever changed. Outside Belfast City Hall they gathered, as in other towns and cities across the United Kingdom, to remember serving soldiers and past comrades. In Cornwall, the bridge across the River Allen in Truro was hung with thousands of poppies crafted by hands around the world to pay tribute to the lives lost in war. And on beaches around the British Isles, artists created a dozen likenesses in the sand. Heddwyn was a Welsh-language poet killed on the first day of the Battle of Passchendaele. For a few hours today, he was commemorated in the sand of his native land in Colwyn Bay. The man behind the tribute hopes it was fitting.
And it's wonderful to be able to think about someone who lived through the reality of a war and wrote so extraordinarily about it and gave that information to us as a blessing, as a warning, really.
And now, even after 100 years, the memory of a whole country's loss is as clear as ever. Damon Green, ITV News.
Befitting a day that marks the sacrifice in 2 world wars, there were acts of remembrance in many nations around the globe. At a gathering of world leaders in France, including the United States President Donald Trump and Russia's President Vladimir Putin, the French President Emmanuel Macron urged the leaders of today to turn away from nationalism, violence and ambitions of dominance. Our Europe editor James Mates was there.
Across the width of the Champs-Élysées, braving driving rain and a wind that played havoc with umbrellas, 68 world leaders walked towards the Arc de Triomphe and the tomb of France's unknown soldier. Only 2 missed the long walk: President Trump, who has found the rain disconcerting this weekend, and then arriving last, as he likes to, Russia's Vladimir Putin. Trump and Putin won't meet formally during this visit, but they did seem pleased to see each other. It was a solemn ceremony of remembrance, a minute's silence, broken exactly 100 years after the gun stopped firing by a bugler sounding ceasefire. President Macron symbolically rekindled the eternal flame that burns above the tomb of the unknown soldier. But he wasn't going to let such a gathering go by without reminding those who joined him in Paris that the policies and miscalculations that led to the First World War could one day be repeated. Just days ago, President Trump had called himself a nationalist. This is what his host had to say about that.
Car le patriotisme est l'exact contraire du nationalisme.
Patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism, he said, Nationalism is a betrayal of patriotism. In saying our interests first, whatever happens to the others, you erase the most precious thing a nation can have, its moral values.
Ses valeurs morales.
President Trump was listening, but it's unlikely he agreed with the sentiments. Taking advantage of the presence of so many world leaders, President Macron convened a peace forum here this afternoon to talk about the importance of international cooperation. Trump did not attend. Instead, he did today defy the weather and visit the American military cemetery at Suresnes, the last resting place of 1,500 Americans who died in World War I.
It is our duty to preserve the civilization they defended and to protect the peace they so nobly gave their lives to secure 1 century ago.
President Macron left them all with a question. Would the images of today be a symbol of a lasting peace or of the last moment of unity before a new disorder? James Mates, ITV News, Paris.
We'll leave you tonight as the minutes tick away on this, the 100th anniversary of Remembrance, with two of the most striking images. At the Tower of London, 10,000 torches that have burned every night this week have been lit by volunteers and veterans for the final time. A collective commemoration of the individual sacrifice of so many. And at the cenotaph built after the First World War to honour the dead, the wreaths laid this morning by royalty, political leaders and so many veterans are still there. At their heart, the simple symbol of remembrance, the scarlet poppy of Flanders Field that pledges we will remember them. A very good night to you.